Welcome back. Now, the 2024 African Mining Indaba kicked off today in Cape Town under the theme Embracing the Power of Positive Disruption, a bold new future for African mining. The Indaba, of course, taking place as many local miners have been dealing with logistics challenges. So we're zooming in on the manganese industry, the challenges and opportunities. And joining me now as you unpack some of the factors influencing moves in this space is Allen Overy Busisiwe Nhlapho. Thank you so much for your time, Busisiwe. Now, we barely talk about manganese mining as a standalone topic. It's usually as a commodity that's part of a diversified miner that's listed on the JSE or indirectly through the steel industry. So let's start off with the basics. What is manganese used for?
Hi, Zanati. Thank you so much for having me. That's a very good question because before I started advising the client that I'm currently advising, I too didn't know. So manganese is a very important metal for South Africa as a whole, both in terms of its contribution to our GDP, to employment and to exports, as well as its strategic value for the green economy and energy transition that the whole world is going through. It's a key component in steel making, like you mentioned, which is why it's significant in the steel industry. But it's also a key component of batteries that are used in electric vehicles and smartphones, laptops, and devices like that. So a very, very critical metal.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about, for example, you mentioned that it is a crucial part of the steel making process. And of course, that also largely depends on economic growth, and not just South African economic growth, but global economic growth and also infrastructure investment. And I'm wondering, just looking at the global economic landscape, for example, I know that we depend a lot on China, for example, and the infrastructure investment in South Africa for our steel. And of course, that trickles down to manganese. Just looking at the economical landscape right now, what can you say about manganese demand at this point?
I mean, you're absolutely right that there are a number of factors that affect the demand as well as the supply of manganese, most notably being the global steel industry. And as you mentioned, China is one of the main markets to which the South African manganese industry exports to. And so things, geopolitical events, disasters, natural disasters such as COVID 2020 caused a sharp decline in steel production and demand, which led to a slump in the manganese prices as well as the exports. However, the recovery since 2021 has been quite remarkable. In fact, I believe that as at 2021, manganese was the 9th most exported product in South Africa, and we are the largest exporter as South Africa and also hold the highest manganese ore reserves in the world. And so while the global economy and what's happening in the steel market is very important for what happens to manganese here, there has been an increase in the demand for manganese, which is what makes the topic of our discussion quite interesting. How do we get it out there?
Well, actually, let's talk about that. Some of the headwinds that the manganese mining industry is facing. Of course, miners in South Africa have long had issues with difficulties on getting their commodities out of the country because of the export challenges, and particularly at the Transnet ports. What options are there for manganese miners in terms of access to export channels?
I mean, so I'll start off by saying that South African mining just in general, is challenging. And so the manganese industry wouldn't be exempt from that, And as I mentioned, there are challenges that are external to what we ourselves can do in the country. So things like market volatility and competition that we've already touched on. But a big issue, which is what you're speaking about, has got to do with the port bottleneck. And it affects the manganese exporters in particular. And so the infrastructure constraints that limit our ability and capacity to export manganese ore is the biggest challenge that we're currently facing right now, and what we are at Allen Overy involved in trying to assist with. And so you ask what is the solution for that? There has actually been a proposed solution, which is the development of a new manganese port in the Eastern Cape, in the Guga Special Economic Development Zone. And this project has been in the pipeline for several years, with the RFP, the request for proposal, kicking off in October 2021. Those bids were received from a number of consortia who are bidding, and they include manganese producers, technical experts, engineers, who are specialists in the field and are trying to come up with a solution that is going to be state of the art and create a terminal that allows us to now get rid of that bottleneck that we were speaking about, because currently we've got limited capacity of tonnage that we're able to export through the country, something like 14 million tons per year, which is way less than the current export demand. And so the new port that is currently under deliberation by Transnet and the Guga Development Corporation will increase that capacity greatly. There's a number of benefits to this new port that is being looked at, and other than increasing the tonnage, it would also increase our export capacity, reduce the transport distance and cost of the manganese ore. It would improve the environmental and social performance of the manganese sector by using state-of-the-art technology and equipment, and also create, economic and employment opportunities, which are very, very important in the Eastern Cape region, by attracting investment, stimulating industrial development, supporting local businesses, and creating direct and indirect jobs.
Yeah, and I mean, Busisiwe, just as we wrap up the conversation, let's broaden it out geographically. What does Africa's manganese mining capability as a continent look like?
Sure, as a continent, I am not the expert on that, but what I do know is if we're saying that South Africa is the the largest manganese ore producer and exporter, I think that our numbers, and as I said, we're currently doing about 14 million tons per annum and are trying to increase that capacity to 16 million tons per annum and even greater in the future. But as it is currently, that's what we're currently looking at. So I can't speak to the rest of the continent, but certainly as South Africa's capabilities.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your insights on that. Of course, we will be keeping a keen eye on the conversations that I had at the Mining Indaba on the manganese mining sector. That was Busisiwe Nhlapho, Senior Associate at international law firm Allen Overy.